Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Jeffrey Epstein Show. I'm your host, Bobbycapucci, and this is Daily Drop number 366. Today we have an article from a Stanford law professor named Bob Weisberg. And in this article, he discusses the charges that Epstein originally was tagged with. He discusses the non-prosecution agreement. He discusses a little bit about RICO even. Now, this is an article I covered a while back, but it's one that I had archived and thought that we should revisit, and not with a flashback episode, but with a new, fresh look at this article and what Bob Weisberg from Stanford has to say about the prosecution of Jeffrey Epstein. And I think it's important with the NPA coming up tomorrow at the 11th Circuit. I think that this is pretty relative to the conversation at hand. So we're going to dive into this article from stanford.edu, and we're going to see what Bob Weisberg has to say about the Epstein charges when they were originally slapped on Jeffrey Epstein in 2019. Now, this article was originally published on July 15th of 2019. And what we have here is a law professor who was looking at the charges laid against Epstein and breaking down some of the twists and turns that could be expected throughout the case. And it's always a good idea to hear from somebody like this who has a good grip on just how these cases usually go and how some of the legalese is explained and broken down. Because, look, there are so many different layers to this shit that if you're not a lawyer, it's almost impossible to just jump in and understand what's going on here. Unless you've been following this story for quite some time, it is very difficult to jump in the middle and have a true grasp about what is going on in this case. So let's go back and revisit this article from law.stanford.edu. And the headline is Stanford's Law, Bob Weisberg on Epstein Charges. Like I said, this article was originally published on July 15th of 2019, and Robert Weisberg is answering questions from Sharon Driscoll. Charges were filed against Jeffrey Epstein on Monday, July 15th, accusing the wealthy financier, pedophile, who has links to powerful people, including current and former presidents, of sex trafficking and other crimes. When these charges were first announced, there was a frenzy, right? People were, finally paying some attention to Jeffrey Epstein once again. And you had all of these legal professors and these legal minds coming out and speaking on what they thought was going to occur. And going back and looking at all of those people who came out with commentary, etc., Mr. Weisberg did a really good job with this Q&A session, and he shed a little bit of light, added some context to some of the more, pressing legal questions. These new charges come a decade after similar charges against Epstein ended in a widely criticized plea deal. Last Friday, criticism of that plea resulted in the resignation of Labor Secretary Alex Acosta, a former federal prosecutor who negotiated the deal. And like I've said from the jump, Acosta is spineless and a coward, and he most certainly deserved all of the flack he got for his role in this. But it shouldn't stop there. It shouldn't stop at Acosta just because some people want to score political points. It should go all the way up the ladder to Mukasey, all the way up to the Bush administration. These people were the ones that initiated all of this. Acosta just acts on his own? These state attorneys, U.S. attorneys, just do whatever they want with no guidance from the Home Office? That's BS. That's not how bureaucracies work. And that's certainly not how the U.S. Attorney's Office works. In the discussion that follows, Stanford law professor Robert Weisberg discusses the Acosta plea deal and the current charges against Epstein. Question: can you explain the new charges filed by Jeffrey Berman in New York? And answer: Jeffrey Berman, Stanford Law School, 1984, the head U.S. attorney in the Southern District of New York, has obtained indictments against Epstein for various offenses involving sex with minors, including charges under the umbrella of interstate trafficking, as well as money laundering and tax crimes involving the money implicated in the trafficking ring. Now, right away, you're hearing from this law professor, okay? From Stanford Law, not one of the Harvard scuzzbags, but from Stanford Law, who is breaking it down. The charges were under an umbrella of interstate trafficking. That means trafficking interstate, right? Out of the state, different places, bringing these girls around. That's automatically a violation of the Mann Act. We haven't heard anything of that. And he states here interstate trafficking, as well as money laundering and tax crimes involving the money implicated in the trafficking ring. So right there, he's laying out the case that this is obviously a RICO case. And the fact that it has not been initiated as such from the very beginning sends off alarm bells, in my opinion. This should have been a RICO case from the second that Jeffrey Epstein was arrested back in the first time. Most certainly the second time around, this should have initiated RICO right away, and when Epstein was arrested, all of the co-conspirators should have been picked up at the same time. And then let's let the courts sort it out, right? You know, it's a very simple way to do this. Let's get them all indicted, and then they can have trials like every American is able to do. That is what our rights provide us. So let's get it all worked out. They should have all been arrested at the same time. But no, they weren't. What do you think? The guy was operating a trafficking ring by himself? How is a ring operated by one man? It is not. Was it significant that Epstein was arrested as he came off his private plane in New Jersey? I understand that his Manhattan mansion was searched soon after and evidence uncovered. Answer: presumably the FBI was concerned that Epstein anticipated a search and might destroy or erase evidence. Well, that's fine and well, and I think it's a good idea that the FBI anticipated that, but don't you think that it would have been a good idea to have agents present at all of his properties the second you initiated the arrest and the first raid? Shouldn't that all went off at the same time in a concurrent fashion, including Zorro Ranch, which isn't even mentioned, which is just insane to me? Considering all of the evidence that we have that girls have come forward and said they were abused at Zorro Ranch, I don't understand how Zorro Ranch was A, never raided, B, never mentioned in this report, and C, still occupied by Jeffrey Epstein's peeps. So, erasing evidence, yeah, I'm sure that occurred. Do I have direct evidence of that? No, I don't. Right? I'm just, But from the circumstantial evidence that we have built and the case that we have built, there is certainly probable cause for that. The strategy of avoiding this result by first arresting him in New Jersey was perfectly legal, so long as the FBI had probable cause for the arrest. Oh, and they had that in spades, right? They've had probable cause to arrest Jeffrey Epstein and his co-conspirators for literally decades at this point. And nothing was ever done. Nothing. It took an investigation from the Miami Herald to try and kneecap Acosta to bring this whole thing tumbling down. And that is such a black eye on the Just Us department, and certainly a black eye on the American lawmakers that infest Congress and the Senate. Incidentally, Epstein soon offered his house as collateral in his bail application, and, in any event, this and other assets might later be forfeited to the government, so the government might as well get a chance to enjoy the real estate it may soon own. Well, that's exactly what happened, right? Now that we're looking back in hindsight, the estate has to liquidate all of these properties for the compensation fund. So that shows you right there off the bat, looking back at this in hindsight, that Bob Weisberg knows his business and knows exactly what he's talking about. So again, that is why we're revisiting this article today. Do the new charges include crimes committed in Florida? What about the 2007 case and the plea deal? Answer: even if the old plea deal remained solid, it would not bar new prosecution for crimes that were part of the same pattern of conduct in Florida in the early 2000s, and certainly not for crimes committed in that same era in New York. Yeah, okay, well, I get it, New York is a focus here, but what about the Virgin Islands? What about Zorro Ranch? It is so obscene that these places are left out, as if the girls weren't abused in these locations as well. I just don't understand how these properties aren't all wrapped up as one, and how all these doors weren't kicked in at the same time. Most obviously, so long as new victims come forward, each victimization counts as a separate case of sex with a minor, so there is no double jeopardy. And that's important, right? You know, Ghislaine Maxwell's lawyers would certainly try and argue that if they could, the double jeopardy aspect. And you know that Epstein's lawyers were certainly going to go after that technicality and use that as a defense to try and defend him from the second batch of charges that he received. And that was certainly the way they were lining up. In addition, new charges involving other statutes like the money laundering and tax offenses and racketeering, RICO charges, do not overlap with the original Florida charges in such a way as to be barred by double jeopardy. And that's a fact, because these RICO charges are going to be completely new. Once they drop these RICO charges on them and slap them in the mouth with those, then all of these financial crimes come into play. Everything they have done pretty much comes into play. And it makes me think, and it makes me wonder, what the hell is taking so long? They had no problem unleashing RICO on R. Kelly or Keith Raniere, and I say great, good, they should have. But where is the redress here? Where is the launch of RICO in this case, where it most certainly should be applied? Question: why was the Acosta plea deal criticized? What do you think was wrong about it? Answer: well, the concern that it was too lenient seems legitimate. Acosta and others seem to acknowledge that they felt overwhelmed by Epstein's team of lawyers and network of rich allies, an unusual concession for someone representing the United States in a major criminal case. Although he says that federal investigators and some of the survivors were intimidated and even stalked by Epstein's people. So that alone right there should play big tomorrow with the 11th Circuit Court of Appeals. If we live in a country with justice, if we live in a country where they're going to pretend that there's justice, then the 11th Circuit Court of Appeals must throw this NPA out tomorrow. They must get rid of it. There is no way on God's green earth that a non-prosecution agreement as draconian as this should be able to stand. Acosta's deference to the state prosecutor doesn't make a lot of sense. Federal prosecutors often work out arrangements whereby they will reduce or dismiss federal charges if they are satisfied that the state has dealt justly with the defendant, but they have no obligation to do so, especially where the state case seems so lenient. 100%. This should have never been kicked back down to the state level. This should have stayed a federal case, and the full weight of the federal government should have been positioned against Jeffrey Epstein and all of his associates. And that should have been bolstered by RICO charges. The then Palm Beach prosecutor, Barry Krischer, has put the blame on Acosta, but there is plenty to go around. The only officials who look good in this sordid episode are the two Palm Beach police officers who urged Krischer to file major felony charges and gave him lots of evidence. But Krischer, perhaps deferring to Epstein's local power, even proposed to limit the charge to a misdemeanor and then settled on a single felony count of soliciting prostitution with limited incarceration. How can anyone not look at this and see how funky and effed up it is? And now remember, we're talking about the Palm Beach situation here with all of the little girls from high schools that were moving in and out of the house that were being brought in through this pyramid scheme. That alone should have put Jeffrey Epstein and his associates under the prison for 1 million years. Never mind all of the eyewitness accounts and the survivors who have come forward and bolstered those claims. One specific oddity stands out. The deal immunized various potential accomplices. It is not unusual for a plea deal to include a promise not to charge or go easy on close family members, as where two spouses who have small children are both nationally charged, but a deal protecting non-family possible accomplices is. One wonders if Epstein was bargaining not so much on behalf of protection for his allies, but in effect protection from them, fearing that if charged, they would drop any loyalty to him. Look, Jeffrey Epstein was certainly an asset, and he was doing his disgusting deeds veiled in a cloud of secrecy. And when this whole entire thing blew up, they rushed to try and protect themselves as well as Epstein. You see the way the prosecutors handled themselves here? They had all the ammunition they ever needed, and they were scared to charge him because of the political connections he has and because of the power and wealth that he also has. If that is not a problem to you, then I don't know what is. Equal justice under the law. It's not just a saying. Can Acosta's plea deal be overturned? It was criticized by a judge. There is a very unusual legal question here. Normally, a plea deal is very hard to undo after a judge accepts it. A defendant can occasionally undo a plea if she can prove that it was not knowing or voluntary, or that she had ineffective assistance of counsel, or that the prosecutor breached the term of the deal. The prosecutor can, in theory, undo a plea if she proves the defendant has breached. Here we have a set of survivors asking a judge to undo the plea because the original trial judge did not give required notice to survivors. This effort, led by Professor Paul Cassell, an eminent victims' rights advocate, faces high legal barriers. It certainly did. When it first was kicked off and they were first challenging this, it certainly faced some real steep legal challenges. And a lot of people never even thought it would get to the 11th Circuit Court of Appeals. But here we are, folks, on the eve of the 11th Circuit hearing this case. And there is a better than good chance, in my opinion, that this NPA gets overturned or gets its teeth yanked out. Now, look, is that for certain? No way. You know, and I know that anyone dealing in certainties in the Jeffrey Epstein case is probably pulling your leg. All right? There's no certainties when it comes to what courts are going to do or how they're going to rule or how they're going to decide. But I would say that with everything that we know now and all of the circumstantial evidence, that it would be hard for me to believe that the 11th Circuit Court of Appeals could throw this out on merit. Now, they might find some technicalities, and I'm sure that the government is working overtime to find those technicalities. But let's be real. This NPA was garbage from the jump, and it's even more garbage now, and it needs to be done away with. Question: what about Epstein's employees who were accused of aiding him in committing these crimes? Do you expect them to be charged or become witnesses? Answer: if you add to employees various people who did some sort of business with Epstein, there may be a few who will at least be threatened with charges and offer to get their cooperation. My guess is that there will be some who will feel no disincentive to testify against him. So remember, this was all when Jeffrey Epstein was alive. Now, Mr. Weisberg thought that employees and various people who did business with Epstein, does that ring a bell, folks? Isn't that what we've been talking about? The ties that bind financially? He thinks that these people will at least be threatened with charges and offer to get cooperation. And now that's probably going on behind the scenes. We don't know what sort of sealed indictments are going on here, but we do know that the investigation continues to grow. And we do know that the Virgin Islands, at the very least, the U.S. Virgin Islands, has a civil RICO case going. So while we do not know exactly who the government is rattling, who the government is talking to, who the government is offering a deal to, my guess is that people that were in business with Jeffrey Epstein intimately, and of course the core four, are really high up on the radar. And as we see this get closer to trial time, and especially if we see that NPA get tossed, then I think that the floodgates will open and we will see a rain of RICO charges. My question is, what in the hell is the holdup? If you'd like to contact me, you can do that at bobbycapucci@protonmail.com. That's BOBBYCAPUCCI @protonmail.com. You can also find me on Twitter at BOBBY_CAPUCCI. All of the links that go with this episode can be found in the description box. To everybody who supports the podcast, thank you folks very much. All right, everybody, I will be back tomorrow morning and we will pick back up where we left off. I hope you all have an incredible evening.